Well, here we have the makings of the bottom end for what will become Asbo number 39, which is a Royal Enfield 350 Model G engine, which I've been working on the bottom end of. And I've got the crankcases loosely assembled here with the crankshaft in position, and a main bearing conversion on the drive side, which I've done, which I may or may not discuss later. And this is just a trial assembly, and I've put it together to see what end float there is and measure it so that I can shim it accordingly. I've got the crankshaft in position in the crankcases there, and I've got a screwdriver underneath the timing side flywheel, which I'm going to use to lever the crankshaft up through the bearings. So obviously the end float's taken up, the crank is resting as low as it can go, and I'll lever the crankshaft. I've got my dial gauge here. One rotation of the clock face is 1 millimetre. Let's see what we got. That's 1.3. 1 millimetre there, 0.3. So that's the amount of end float that I need to get rid of by shimming. So I'll use that information to gather up some shims and hopefully reduce that to virtually nothing. Here we have the bottom end of what will be Asbo number 39 again, the 350 Model G, whose crank I've lightened and rebalanced. And I've also got a little trick up my sleeve with the drive side main bearing, and I've now got the crankshaft end float shimmed to how I'd like it to be. We had 1.3 millimeters before, but I've worked on the shimming. I've also got the conrod laying on the centre line of the crankcase joint, and we've got this metric dial gauge here with the needle on 0, and if we have a look at this, we've got 0.03 of a millimetre end float there, which equates to around about 1.5 thousandths of an inch and no more. From the 0 to the 1 would be 0.1 of a millimetre or 4 thousandths of an inch, and as you can see we're not even getting half of that. So we're at about 1.5 thousandths of an inch at the very most. So that'll do nicely, and this engine's ready to go together and have the bottom end bolted up, and that'll be it. Put together, ready to join the other components on the top end of the engine, which I don't have. I've only got the bottom end, but this will soon be ready to go home and join the rest of the bits, and hopefully make for quite a fast and lively Royal Enfield 350 Model G. I'm about to put the crankcase halves together for this Royal Enfield 350 Model G engine that I've worked on, and done some tuning work in the way of lightening and rebalancing the crank and toughening up the bottom end a little. And I mentioned a trick I've done with the drive side main bearing earlier on. I've actually got 2 needle roller bearings side by side in the drive side now. I don't know how well that's going to show up there. I'll try and get some light on it. Perhaps we can see that. There's 2 needle races side by side in there, filling and occupying the whole width of the bearing housing, and there's the inner races there slid onto the crankshaft, onto the main shaft. So no more main shaft running directly in rollers on the drive side, although I've left the timing side standard. There's less strain on that side and it was in good shape, and it's obviously lasted a long time, so I've let that be. But with an increase in power that we're expecting from this engine, there probably will be more strain on the drive side, so that may well be a good idea. And the only other thing that I've done, which the owner asked me to do if I could, if we have a look at this scrap timing side case I've got from a Model C, you see there's an well, not an oil way, a breather hole through from the timing chest back into the oil tank. can see there's my WD-40 pipe pushed through. As you can see that there, coming through. So there's a little passageway in these early crankcases, I think these are pre-war, where the oil tank and the timing case are actually interconnected, and one can breathe into the other and so on. So I was asked to replicate that on the Model G crankcases which didn't have such a thing, and hopefully you might just see there's the hole there. I'm pushing that red pipe from a WD-40 can through the hole that I drilled, so that's now got that passageway, which, should it ever be required, if things don't work out as the owner hoped, you can easily plug it again anyway. But that means that this front section of oil tank now can breathe directly into the timing chest. The rear part breathes directly to outside anyway through that small passageway there. So that's all done. I've got my sealant on the drive side crankcase now, so I'm going to put that together and get some bolts in, and then we'll have one last look at it with the crank hopefully still spinning freely and the bottom end good to go. Here's that Royal Enfield 350 Model G engine bottom end all assembled, and most, if not quite all, of the studs and nuts that clamp the crankcases together are fitted and are tight. There's a couple there. I think the owner's got the nuts and washers and that stud, but the vast majority are in and tight. And we've got the crank still spinning nice and freely. We've seen the drive side main bearing conversion that I've done. That's coming back up to near top dead centre nicely under its own counterbalance, and likewise that way. So that's spinning nice and freely. There's no perceptible end float. There was about just shy of 1.5 thousandths of an inch when I had the cases clamped together earlier and the bearings and everything dry. I've now got them assembled with a little bit of oil in them, and between the faces of the flywheels and the faces of the bearings at those locations on both sides, I suppose that oil is enough to dampen out any perceptible movement side to side, so we've virtually got nothing. So we've got the crank spinning nice and freely, no end float to speak of, and we've also got that extra hole that I drilled as the owner asked for in there for the front part of the oil tank to vent into the timing case should it be required. So all I've got to do now is sort out the cam timings for it, which are not going to be standard. I'm going to run 2 exhaust cams in it, as I did in the G the Asbo number 28, that was very similar to this. It was actually a hybrid, I think, of a CO and a G engine, that one. Very, very similar, and I got some good figures and encouraging results with a pair of exhaust cams fitted instead of an exhaust cam and an inlet. So I'm going to put 2 exhaust cams in this, time it the same, and then it's over to the owner.